Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back to a time when the world's largest empire stood at the edge of everything it had ever known, unaware that tea and silver and poppy smoke would unravel centuries of power in less than a single lifetime. You're standing in China, sometime around 1800. The Qing Dynasty stretches from the Forbidden City in Beijing down through rice terraces, across the Yangtze River, past the Pearl River Delta, all the way to the misty borders of Tibet and Mongolia. It's the most populous empire on Earth. Over 300 million people live under the rule of the Qing Emperor, and for the most part, they believe, truly believe, that China is the center of civilization itself. They call it the Celestial Empire, and honestly, they have pretty good reasons. You walk through a marketplace in Guangzhou, what the British call Canton, and the air smells like jasmine tea, roasted duck, and incense. Silk merchants spread their fabrics under wooden awnings. Calligraphers paint characters onto scrolls with brushes made from wolf hair. Porters carry lacquered furniture down narrow streets, navigating around sedan chairs and wandering chickens. Everything feels organized, ancient, permanent. The Qing dynasty has ruled since 1644, when Manchu warriors swept down from the north and toppled the previous Ming emperors. By now, in 1800, they've been in power for over a century and a half. They've absorbed Manchu and Han Chinese culture into something vast and bureaucratic and ceremonial. A system of exams, rituals, tribute, and carefully balanced power. And they've got something the rest of the world desperately wants. Tea. Not just any tea. Chinese tea. The only tea, really, because China is the only place that knows how to grow it, process it, and keep the secret of its production locked away from foreign eyes. Britain is obsessed with it. By the late 1700s, the British are drinking tea at breakfast, tea at lunch, tea at dinner, and tea before bed. It's become part of their identity. Ironic, considering it comes from the other side of the planet. But here's the thing. China doesn't want anything Britain has to offer. The British show up with woolens, with clocks, with trinkets and manufactured goods, and Chinese officials politely decline. There's a famous letter, well, famous to historians anyway, written by the Qianlong Emperor to King George III in 1793. It's beautifully condescending. The emperor essentially says, "We have everything we need within our borders. We don't require your strange and ingenious objects." It's the 18th century equivalent of thanks, but no thanks. So the British pay in silver. Tons of it. Literally. Spanish silver dollars, Mexican pesos, anything that can be melted down and counted. The silver flows into China, and the tea flows out, and the trade imbalance grows wider every year. You stand on the docks at Canton, watching the foreign ships rock gently in the harbor. There are rules here. Strict ones. Foreign merchants aren't allowed to enter the city proper. They live in a narrow strip of warehouses and offices along the riverfront, a zone the Chinese call the 13 Factories. They can only trade during certain seasons. They have to deal through licensed Chinese merchant houses, known as the Kohong. It's all very controlled, and for a while it works. But you can feel something else in the air now, something the merchants don't talk about openly in the tea houses. There are whispers about a new kind of cargo. Something that doesn't get listed on the official manifests. Something that arrives in the bellies of fast ships and gets unloaded in the dark. The empire is still strong, but the cracks are just beginning to show. Here's something historians love to debate. Was the Qing dynasty already in decline by 1800, or was it still at its height? Some argue that internal problems, corruption, population pressure, weakening border defenses, meant the empire was fragile before the opium trade ever became a crisis. Others say the Qing was perfectly stable, and it was external pressure, foreign imperialism, and the deliberate introduction of opium that broke it. The truth, like most truths, probably lives somewhere in between. You walk past a scholar's study. Through the paper windows, you see him bent over a desk, practicing calligraphy by candlelight. He's preparing for the imperial examinations, the grueling tests that determine who gets to serve in the bureaucracy, who gets power, who gets respect. It's a system that's been running for over 1,000 years. It feels permanent, but nothing is. Outside, the river flows. The junks sway. The foreign merchants drink wine in their factories and do their math, trying to figure out how to balance the books when all the silver keeps flowing in one direction. Someone, somewhere, is already growing poppies. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment if you'd like. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing this strange little community spans the whole globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The problem is simple, really. Britain wants tea. China has tea. But China doesn't want anything Britain has. You're standing in a London counting house now, watching clerks bent over ledgers, their quills scratching numbers on a paper. The East India Company, the massive trading corporation that basically runs Britain's Asian commerce, is hemorrhaging silver. Every year, millions of pounds worth of precious metal flow east to pay for tea, porcelain, and silk. And nothing flows back. It's the kind of trade imbalance that makes economists nervous and empires irritable. Here's the thing about silver in the early 1800s. It's not just money. It's the global currency. Spanish mines in the Americas pump it out, and it circles the world, lubricating trade everywhere. But in China, it's especially important. The Qing government collects taxes in silver. Merchants hoard it. It's stable, trusted, universal. And the British are watching their silver reserves drain away like water through a sieve. You drift back to Canton, to those narrow factories along the waterfront where foreign merchants live in their restricted zone. They're frustrated. Some of them have been here for years, following the same rigid rules, dealing through the same licensed Chinese merchants, paying the same fees and taxes. They try everything. They bring woolens, thick, scratchy British cloth. The Chinese officials smile politely and decline. Why would they need wool when they have silk? They bring clocks. Intricate, mechanical marvels with gears and chimes. Beautiful objects. The emperor accepts a few as curiosities, gifts for the palace. But there's no market for them. Chinese craftsmen can make their own clocks if they really want them. They bring manufactured goods, metalwork, scientific instruments. The response is always the same. Polite disinterest. There's a cultural dimension here that historians still debate. Was China genuinely self-sufficient, or was it simply closed-minded? Some scholars argue the Qing Dynasty had developed a sophisticated economy that truly didn't need foreign imports. Others suggest it was arrogance, an imperial worldview that saw China as the center and everything else as peripheral, barbaric, inferior. Probably both. You watch a British merchant named William Jardine pace his factory office. He's Scottish, sharp-minded, and increasingly convinced that the rules of this game need to change. He and his partner, James Matheson, are building a trading empire. But they can't make it work under the current system. The math just doesn't work. Every year, British demand for tea grows. By the 1820s, the British are importing over 30 million pounds of tea annually. That's a staggering amount. And every pound is paid for in silver. The outflow is unsustainable. You stand on the docks at night, watching coolies load tea chests onto British ships. The chests are stamped with Chinese characters and company marks. Inside, black tea, green tea, oolong, leaves that traveled from misty mountain plantations to processing houses to these waterfront warehouses. Each chest represents silver changing hands. Somewhere in the distance, in the darkness beyond the official zones, other ships are arriving. Smaller, faster vessels. They don't dock at the main harbor. They slip into quiet inlets and river tributaries where customs officials can be avoided or bribed. They're carrying something new. Actually, not new. Opium has existed in China for centuries, mostly as medicine. Doctors prescribe it for pain, for dysentery, for dozens of ailments. People know it can be addictive. There are warnings in medical texts going back hundreds of years. But recreational use? Smoking it? That's relatively recent, and it's growing. The opium itself comes from somewhere else entirely. You drift west now, across the Bay of Bengal to India. Specifically to Bengal, where the British East India Company controls vast territories. The company has a monopoly on opium production there. They license farmers to grow poppies, oversee the harvest, process the raw opium into balls wrapped in poppy petals, and stamp each one with their mark. It's all very official, very regulated. Just not in China. Here's the legal trick that makes it possible. The East India Company doesn't technically sell opium to China. That would be illegal, even by their own rules. Instead, they sell it at auction in Calcutta to private merchants, many of them British, some American, some from other European countries. Those merchants then smuggle it into China. The company gets its profit. The merchants get theirs. And officially, everyone's hands are clean. You watch the auction house in Calcutta. Men in tropical suits bid on chests of opium like they're bidding on grain or cotton. The prices fluctuate based on quality and demand. The best opium, Patna and Benares varieties, commands premium prices. It all gets loaded onto ships. Fast ships, clippers designed for speed, with shallow drafts that let them navigate coastal waters and river estuaries. They're painted to blend with the sea. They move at night when possible. And slowly, steadily, the trade reverses. Instead of silver flowing into China to pay for tea, silver starts flowing out of China to pay for opium. It takes years for this shift to become obvious. Trade patterns move slowly. But by the 1820s, Chinese officials are starting to notice something alarming. The silver that used to accumulate in their treasuries is disappearing. Where's it going? You stand in a government office in Beijing. An official reviews reports from Canton. The numbers don't make sense. Trade is still happening. Tea is still being exported. Porcelain is still being shipped, but somehow the silver balance is wrong. He doesn't know about the smuggling networks yet. He doesn't know that out in the Pearl River Delta, beyond the official customs stations, an entire parallel economy is operating. Small boats called fast crabs and scrambling dragons ferry opium from foreign ships anchored offshore to Chinese receivers on the coast. The system works because everyone involved has an incentive to make it work. Foreign merchants profit, Chinese smugglers profit, and the corrupt officials who accept bribes to look the other way, they profit too. The only ones losing are the Qing government and the Chinese people. But the cost had already been set in motion. You're drifting through a poppy field in Bengal now, somewhere in the Ganges River Valley. It's early morning. The air is cool and slightly damp. Mist hangs low over the fields, and the poppies are blooming, pale pink, white, deep purple. They're beautiful, really, delicate petals that seem too innocent for what they'll become. Indian farmers move through the rows with small curved knives, making careful incisions in the poppy seed pods. It's skilled work, precise. Cut too deep, and you damage the pod. Cut too shallow, and the sap won't flow properly. They work at dawn because that's when the opium weeps best. The white latex oozes out of the cuts, thick and sticky. By afternoon, it's darkened and hardened slightly. The farmers return and scrape it off with small tools, collecting it into containers. Raw opium. It smells earthy, slightly sweet, vaguely medicinal. This has been happening for decades now. The British East India Company realized something crucial back in the late 1700s. They controlled Bengal, and Bengal's climate was perfect for growing poppies. More importantly, they could produce opium cheaper and in larger quantities than anywhere else. And they knew China had a market for it. Actually, let's be more precise. They knew they could create a market for it. You watch the processing happen in a company factory. The raw opium gets kneaded and formed into balls, each about the size of a grapefruit. Workers wrap them in poppy petals, a nice touch, almost poetic, and pack them into chests. Each chest holds 40 balls. Each ball weighs roughly 3 pounds. The whole operation is incredibly organized. The East India Company licenses specific farmers to grow poppies under contract. They provide seeds, supervision, sometimes loans. The farmers are required to sell their entire opium harvest to the company at fixed prices. No freelancing allowed. It's a monopoly, vertically integrated and brutally efficient. Here's something historians debate. How much did the British government know about what was happening? The East India Company was technically a private corporation, but it was so intertwined with British imperial policy that the line blurred constantly. Company directors sat in Parliament. Government ministers owned company stock. So when the company ramped up opium production in India, was that state policy or corporate initiative? Probably both, deliberately ambiguous. You follow a shipment from Bengal to the coast, to Calcutta's harbor. The chests get loaded onto ships, some British, some American, some from other countries. Remember, the company doesn't technically smuggle the opium into China. They sell it at auction to private merchants who do the smuggling. It's a legal firewall, carefully maintained. The ships sail east across the Bay of Bengal, around the Malay Peninsula, up through the South China Sea. The journey takes weeks. Some ships stop at Singapore or other ports along the way. Others sail directly to the China coast. But they don't go to Canton. Not directly. Instead, they anchor at Linton Island, a small rocky outcrop in the Pearl River estuary, about 60 miles from Canton itself. It's outside Chinese territorial waters, technically. It becomes a floating warehouse, a transfer point where the foreign ships can wait while smaller Chinese boats come out to collect the opium. You stand on the deck of one of these receiving ships, watching the operation. It's 1830 now, and the trade has grown massively. Dozens of ships sit at anchor around Linton. They're not even hiding anymore. Everyone knows what's happening here. Chinese fast crabs, small, quick boats with crews of 8 or 10 men, row out from the coast. They pull alongside the foreign ships, negotiate prices, load their cargo, and disappear back toward shore. The whole system runs on credit and trust, which is fascinating when you think about it. These are illegal transactions, completely outside any legal framework, yet the financial arrangements are remarkably sophisticated. Merchants extend credit. Promissory notes circulate. Bills of exchange get honored across thousands of miles. Crime, but professional crime. The opium moves inland through networks of distributors. Some of it goes to Canton itself. Some travels up the Pearl River to inland cities. Some gets transported overland to other provinces. And everywhere it goes, it finds buyers. Here's the thing about addiction. It doesn't happen overnight. The opium trade didn't immediately create millions of addicts. It was gradual. At first, opium smoking was mostly a luxury, something wealthy people did at social gatherings. Expensive, exclusive. But as supply increased and prices dropped, it spread. By the 1830s, opium dens are appearing in cities across southern China. Small establishments where people can rent a pipe and a place to recline. The dens are usually just rooms with wooden platforms, dim lighting, a few cushions. You step into one such place. It's evening. The air is thick with smoke, sweet, cloying, unmistakable. Men lie on their sides on wooden benches, pipes in hand. The pipes are long, with small ceramic bowls. The proprietor moves between customers, preparing the opium, heating it over a lamp, helping people load their pipes. It's quiet. People don't talk much while smoking opium. They drift. The effect is sedation, euphoria, a sense of warmth and disconnection from problems. For a few hours, poverty doesn't hurt so much. Exhaustion fades. The world softens. And then it wears off. And you need more. Here's a small detail that doesn't make it into most history books. Not all opium in China came from British sources. Some was grown domestically, had been for centuries. Chinese doctors used it medicinally. But the scale was completely different. Domestic production was limited, regulated, mostly medicinal. What the British introduced wasn't opium itself. It was industrialized supply. Mass production. Aggressive marketing. Prices low enough to create a mass market. You drift back to the poppy fields in Bengal. More land is being converted to poppy cultivation every year. The East India Company is expanding production steadily. In 1800, they exported about 4,000 chests of opium to China. By 1830, it's nearly 20,000 chests. The numbers just keep growing. And with each chest that enters China, a little more silver flows out. The trade balance is reversing. The thing that Britain wanted, a way to stop hemorrhaging silver to pay for tea, is working. Maybe too well, because now it's China's turn to watch its silver reserves drain away. The empire hasn't quite realized the scale of what's happening yet, but it will. By the early 1830s, the smuggling networks have become so sophisticated they might as well be legitimate businesses. You're watching the Pearl River Delta from above now, like a bird drifting on warm air currents. Below, the landscape is a maze of waterways, rivers, tributaries, creeks, inlets. Thousands of boats move through these channels every day. Fishing boats, cargo junks, passenger ferries, sampans carrying families. And hidden among them, the smugglers. The thing about smuggling is that it requires infrastructure. You can't just show up with contraband and hope for the best. You need receivers on shore who know when shipments are coming. You need storage facilities. You need distributors who can move product inland. You need enforcers to handle disputes. You need corrupt officials willing to look the other way. And most importantly, you need a payment system. Because here's what's fascinating. The opium trade runs almost entirely on credit and promissory notes. Physical silver doesn't change hands at every transaction. Instead, sophisticated bills of exchange circulate between British merchants in Linton, Chinese distributors in Canton, Kohong merchants in the legitimate tea trade, and bankers in both London and Shanghai. It's a shadow financial system, and it works remarkably well. You drift down to Canton itself. The 13 factories are still the official zone where foreigners can conduct business. During the trading season, roughly November to March, the place is busy. Merchants negotiate tea contracts, inspect porcelain shipments, arrange silk purchases. All perfectly legal, but everyone knows what else is happening. The Kohong merchants, those licensed Chinese traders who have monopoly rights to deal with foreigners, are in an impossible position. Officially, they're supposed to control all foreign trade and ensure nothing illegal occurs. But many of them are deeply involved in the opium trade themselves, either directly or through family members. The bribes flow upward through the bureaucracy like water finding cracks. Local officials accept payments to ignore smuggling. Provincial administrators take their cut. Even some officials in Beijing benefit indirectly, though they'd never admit it. Here's something historians still argue about. How much did the central Qing government actually know? Some scholars think the emperor and his top advisors were genuinely unaware of the scale of opium smuggling until the late 1830s. Others argue that's impossible. The silver drain was showing up in tax receipts, and reports were coming in from provincial officials. The truth might be that they knew something was wrong, but didn't understand the mechanism, or didn't want to. You stand in a warehouse district just outside the official Canton trading zone. It's night. Men unload chests from a boat that just came upriver from Linton. They work quickly, quietly. The chests get carried into a building, logged in someone's private ledger, and distributed to buyers who've already paid or have credit arrangements. No customs inspection, no official paperwork, no taxes paid. The system works because everyone involved profits more from cooperation than from enforcement. A fascinating detail. Some of the most successful opium smugglers are Americans. Ships from Boston and New York participate enthusiastically in the trade. They're not bound by British East India Company rules, so they operate independently, buying opium at Calcutta auctions and selling it in China. There's a special irony here. America fought a revolution against British imperial trade policies, celebrated free markets and independence, and then immediately joined the opium smuggling business. Commerce finds a way. You drift to a money-changing shop in Canton. It's a small establishment, wooden counters, abacuses, ledgers everywhere. A merchant is converting silver taels into bills of exchange that could be redeemed in Hong Kong or Shanghai. The exchanger calculates rates, checks the quality of the silver, makes notations. This is how the money flows out. Chinese buyers pay for opium in silver. That silver goes to foreign merchants. The foreign merchants use it to buy tea and silk, or they convert it to bills and send it abroad. Either way, China's silver supply is draining. By the mid-1830s, the economic effects are becoming obvious. The value of silver relative to copper cash, the everyday currency ordinary Chinese people use, is rising. That might sound technical, but it has brutal real-world consequences. Peasants earn their income in copper. They pay their taxes in silver. As silver becomes scarcer and more valuable, the same tax burden requires more and more copper cash to meet. A farmer who could pay his annual taxes with 100 copper coins in 1800 might need 150 by 1835. His income hasn't changed. The tax rate hasn't changed, but the exchange rate has. It's crushing rural families. You stand in a village somewhere in Guangdong province. A family is gathered around a table, trying to calculate how to pay this year's taxes. The father looks worried. They've sold their surplus rice, their eggs, a pig. They've converted everything to copper cash. But when they take it to the tax collector and exchange it for silver, it's not enough. They'll have to borrow. And borrowing means interest. And interest means debt. And debt means vulnerability. This is happening across southern China. The opium trade isn't just creating addicts, though it's doing that too. It's destabilizing the entire monetary system. Here's another layer. The Qing government's own finances are affected. They collect taxes in silver. They pay officials in silver. Their treasury reserves are denominated in silver. As the silver supply shrinks, their fiscal capacity weakens. It's a slow-motion crisis. Back in Canton, some officials are starting to sound alarms. They write memorials to Beijing, formal reports describing the opium problem. They estimate that millions of taels of silver are leaving the country annually. They warn about addictions spreading among soldiers, scholars, even government officials themselves. But the reports face bureaucratic inertia. The Qing system is vast, layered, formal. Decisions move slowly. There are protocols, hierarchies, precedents to consider. And there's corruption. Officials who benefit from the trade suppress reports. Others write reports, but bury them in safe, bureaucratic language that doesn't convey urgency. You watch a memorial being written by a mid-level official in Canton. He's careful with his words. He describes the opium problem as troubling rather than catastrophic. He suggests investigation rather than immediate action. He knows that if he sounds too alarmist, he might be blamed for allowing the problem to develop on his watch. So the warnings are muffled. Meanwhile, the ships keep coming to Linton. The fast crabs keep rowing out. The opium keeps flowing inland. And the silver keeps flowing out. By 1835, China is importing roughly 30,000 chests of opium annually. Each chest contains about 120 pounds of opium. Do the math. That's over 3.5 million pounds of opium entering the country every year. The trade that started as a British solution to a trade imbalance has become China's catastrophe. But the reckoning is coming. The emperor is worried. You're standing in the Forbidden City now, in one of those vast courtyards where silence feels like a presence. It's 1838. The Daoguang Emperor sits on the dragon throne, and reports are piling up on his desk, reports he can no longer ignore. The silver is leaving China, not slowly, not gradually, rapidly. Imperial treasuries that should be overflowing are running dry. Tax revenues are down. Provincial governors are sending memorials explaining they can't collect what they're supposed to collect because peasants can't afford to pay. And the reason keeps appearing in these reports. Opium. The Daoguang Emperor is not a weak ruler. He's been on the throne since 1820, and he takes his responsibilities seriously. He's frugal, famously so. He wears patched robes to set an example of thrift. He's reduced palace expenses, dismissed unnecessary staff, tried to model virtue. But virtue doesn't stop smugglers. You watch as he convenes his advisors. The Forbidden City is all ritual and hierarchy. Officials prostrate themselves, speak in formal language, follow protocols that have existed for centuries. But beneath the ceremony, there's genuine alarm. The question on the table, what should be done about opium? Here's where it gets complicated. The advisors are divided, and their debate reveals fundamental disagreements about policy, morality, and pragmatism. One faction argues for legalization, not because they like opium, but because prohibition clearly isn't working. Their logic goes like this. Opium is already everywhere. Banning it just drives the trade underground and ensures the government collects no taxes. Better to legalize it, regulate it, tax it, and at least capture some revenue. Plus, if China grows its own opium domestically, the silver won't flow abroad. It's a harm reduction argument. Essentially, the other faction is horrified by this idea. They argue that opium is destroying Chinese society, that the government has a moral duty to protect its people, that legalization would be an admission of defeat. They want strict enforcement, death penalties for dealers, harsh punishments for users, aggressive raids on opium dens. Zero tolerance. Historians still debate which approach would have worked better. Some argue that legalization might have reduced the silver outflow and weakened the smuggling networks. Others point out that it would have done nothing to address addiction and might have made the social crisis worse. The emperor listens to both sides, and then he makes a decision that will change everything. He chooses a man named Lin Zexu. You watch Lin Zexu prepare for his mission. He's in his 50s, a respected official with a reputation for integrity and competence. He served in various provincial posts, distinguished himself as an administrator, earned the emperor's trust. The emperor appoints him as imperial commissioner and sends him to Canton with extraordinary powers. Stop the opium trade by any means necessary. Lin takes the assignment seriously. Before leaving Beijing, he studies everything he can about opium. He reads medical texts about its effects. He reviews reports about the smuggling networks. He consults with other officials who've dealt with the problem. He's thorough, methodical, and absolutely convinced that opium is poisoning China. There's a fascinating letter Lin writes during this period to a friend, not an official document. In it, he describes opium as a foreign poison deliberately introduced to weaken China. He sees it not just as a social problem, but as a form of warfare. He's not entirely wrong. The trip from Beijing to Canton takes weeks. You follow Lin's journey south, down through the provinces. He travels with a retinue of officials and guards, but he also talks to people along the way. He visits opium dens to see the problem firsthand. He interviews former addicts. He inspects smuggling routes. By the time he reaches Canton in March 1839, he knows exactly what he's dealing with. And he's furious. Within days of arriving, Lin begins his crackdown. He's not subtle about it. He orders all foreign merchants to surrender their opium stocks. Immediately, completely, no exceptions. He promises that if they comply, they can resume legitimate trade. If they refuse, he threatens to cut off all commerce and confine them to their factories. The foreign merchants are stunned. This isn't how things work in Canton. Usually there are negotiations, compromises, bribes that make problems go away. The system has rules, informal but well understood. Lin isn't playing by those rules. You stand in the foreign factory district as the tension builds. The merchants send messages to their ships at Linton. Don't surrender anything. They write letters to their home governments. We're being held hostage. They argue that the opium belongs to private merchants, not to them personally, so they can't surrender what they don't own. Lin doesn't care about these legal distinctions. He surrounds the factories with troops. He withdraws all Chinese servants and workers. Suddenly, the foreign merchants have to cook their own meals, wash their own clothes. He cuts off food supplies. He posts notices stating that any Chinese person who helps the foreigners will be executed. It's a siege, polite but absolute. The British Superintendent of Trade, a man named Charles Elliot, realizes Lin is serious. After several weeks of standoff, Elliot makes a crucial decision. He orders British merchants to surrender their opium, and he does it in the name of the British Crown. This is important. By doing this, he transforms the situation. The merchants were surrendering private property. Now it becomes property surrendered under government orders, which means, legally, the British government might be obligated to compensate the merchants for their losses. It's a clever move that will have consequences. Over the next few weeks, more than 20,000 chests of opium are surrendered. 20,000. That's over 2 million pounds of opium. The largest drug seizure in history. You watch as Chinese workers bring the chests to a location Lin has prepared, a beach area where they've dug large trenches. The chests are opened, the opium balls broken apart and mixed with salt and lime, then flushed into the ocean with the tide. The destruction takes weeks. Lin personally supervises. He even performs a ritual, apologizing to the spirit of the sea for polluting the waters, explaining that he has no choice. It's June 1839, and Lin thinks he's won. He writes triumphant memorials to the emperor. He's destroyed the foreign poison. He's shown China's strength. He's defended the empire. But the British merchants are writing letters too. Letters to London. Letters demanding compensation. Letters describing Chinese aggression and seizure of British property. And slowly, in Parliament and in company boardrooms, a different narrative begins to form. The cost was mounting in ways Lin couldn't see yet. Lin Zexu thinks he solved the problem. You're watching him in Canton during the summer of 1839, after the opium destruction is complete. He's confident. He's written detailed reports to the emperor describing his success. He's imposed new regulations on foreign trade. He's required all foreign merchants to sign bonds promising never to bring opium to China again, under penalty of death and confiscation of cargo. The foreign merchants are furious, but what can they do? Lin believes the answer is nothing. China is the celestial empire. Foreign barbarians need Chinese tea more than China needs anything from them. It's simple leverage. But Lin is operating on assumptions that are about to be proven tragically wrong. Here's what he doesn't fully understand. The Industrial Revolution has changed the balance of power in ways that aren't immediately visible. Britain's factories, its steam engines, its coal mines, its iron foundries. These have created not just economic wealth, but military capacity, particularly naval capacity. You drift across the ocean now to London. It's late 1839, and news of Lin's opium destruction has reached Parliament. The merchants whose opium was seized are demanding compensation. They're writing pamphlets, giving speeches, lobbying ministers. They frame it as a matter of principle. British subjects had their property confiscated without due process. The Chinese imprisoned British nationals. They violated the rights of free trade. There's almost no discussion about whether selling opium to China was ethical. Instead, the debate becomes about sovereignty, international law, and the protection of British commercial interests. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Palmerston, is sympathetic to the merchant's case. He's a pragmatist who sees the world in terms of British interests. And from his perspective, China has committed an act of aggression that can't go unanswered. Here's something historians debate. Was the First Opium War really about opium? Or was it about forcing China to accept Western-style international relations? Some scholars argue the opium was just a pretext, that Britain would have found another excuse to impose unequal treaties and open Chinese markets. Others say no, the opium trade was enormously profitable, and Britain went to war specifically to protect that trade. Probably both factors mattered. You watch as the British government makes its decision. Send a military expedition to China. Force the Qing to pay compensation for the destroyed opium. Compel them to open more ports to trade. Make them accept diplomatic relations on equal terms. The fleet that assembles is impressive. Steamships, not just sailing vessels. Iron-hulled gunboats with paddle wheels that can navigate rivers and shallow waters. Ships carrying modern artillery, rifles, Marines trained in contemporary warfare. The technological gap is enormous. Back in Canton, Lin Zexu is preparing for possible conflict, but his preparations reveal how little he understands about what's coming. He's reinforcing traditional defenses. He's mobilizing local militias. He's even consulting with fishermen about underwater obstacles that might stop enemy ships. There's a strange detail here. Lin writes a letter to Queen Victoria. It's an extraordinary document, really. He appeals to her sense of morality and justice. He asks why Britain allows opium to be sold to China when it's prohibited in Britain itself. He argues that China has the right to protect its people from poison. The letter is logical, moral, even eloquent. It probably never reaches Queen Victoria. And even if it did, it wouldn't have mattered. The British fleet arrives in Chinese waters in June 1840. You're watching from shore as the steamships approach. The Chinese defenders have never seen anything like them. Ships that move against the wind. Ships that can navigate rivers without sails. Ships made of iron. It must have seemed like sorcery. The British strategy is methodical. They don't attack Canton directly. Instead, they sail north, blockading ports, seizing coastal positions, demonstrating their superiority. They capture the Chusan Islands. They threaten the mouth of the Yangtze River. The message is clear. We can go wherever we want, and you can't stop us. Lin tries to organize resistance, but he's fighting with obsolete weapons and tactics. Chinese war junks are no match for British gunboats. Chinese cannons, some of them dating back centuries, can't penetrate iron hulls. Chinese soldiers are brave, but poorly equipped and untrained for this kind of warfare. The battles, when they happen, are massacres. You watch one engagement near Canton. British ships bombard Chinese fortifications from a distance beyond the range of Chinese guns. The Chinese defenders can't even return fire effectively. They're just targets. When the British Marines land, they do so with discipline and modern rifles. The Chinese defenders, a mix of regular troops and local militia, charge with spears, swords, and matchlock muskets. It's medieval warfare meeting industrial warfare. The casualties are horrifically one-sided. Here's a detail that doesn't make it into heroic narratives. Many Chinese soldiers fighting these battles are opium addicts themselves. The very problem Lin was trying to solve has weakened the military capacity to resist the invasion sparked by trying to solve it. It's a cruel irony. Back in Beijing, the emperor is receiving reports that make no sense to him. How can barbarian ships defeat the Imperial Navy so easily? How can a few thousand foreign troops threaten an empire of hundreds of millions? The Qing worldview, the assumption of Chinese superiority, the tributary system where other nations came to China as supplicants, is colliding with reality. And reality is winning. The emperor begins to blame Lin Zexu. Lin was supposed to solve the opium problem. Instead, he's provoked a war that China is losing. The emperor needs someone to blame, and Lin is convenient. In September 1841, Lin is dismissed from his post and sent into exile. You watch him leave Canton. He's broken, confused, bitter. He did what he thought was right. He followed the emperor's orders. He defended China's sovereignty and moral principles, and he's being punished for it. Lin will spend years in exile, reflecting on what went wrong. He'll eventually conclude that China needs to learn from the West to adopt Western technology and military methods. He becomes an early advocate for what will later be called self-strengthening, the idea that China can preserve its culture while adopting Western techniques. But that realization comes too late for him. The war continues without Lin. British forces push further north, threatening the Grand Canal, the vital artery that brings grain to Beijing. If that's cut, the capital could starve. The emperor has no choice but to negotiate. But negotiation, in this context, means surrender. The empire that believed itself the center of civilization is about to sign a treaty dictated by foreign barbarians. Everything is about to change. The treaty gets signed in August 1842 aboard a British warship anchored in the Yangtze River. You're standing on the deck of HMS Cornwallis, watching Chinese and British officials meet. The symbolism is deliberate. China's representatives have to come to the British, not the other way around. They have to board a foreign warship. They're negotiating from a position of total defeat. The document they sign is called the Treaty of Nanjing. It's the first of what will become known as the Unequal Treaties, agreements imposed on China by foreign powers, treaties China had no real choice but to accept. Here's what the treaty requires. China must pay 21 million silver dollars in reparations, 6 million for the destroyed opium, 3 million for debts that Chinese merchants owe to British traders, 12 million for the cost of the war. Think about that for a moment. China is being forced to pay for a war that Britain started to protect the opium trade that China tried to stop. The treaty also demands that China cede Hong Kong Island to Britain in perpetuity. That word matters, perpetuity. Not a lease, not a temporary arrangement. Forever. And China must open 5 ports to British trade: Canton, Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai. British merchants can now live and conduct business in these treaty ports with their families. They're subject to British law, not Chinese law. It's called extraterritoriality, and it means British citizens in China essentially exist outside Chinese jurisdiction. You watch the Chinese officials sign. Their faces are carefully neutral, trained by decades of bureaucratic service to show nothing. But you can imagine what they're thinking. This is humiliation, formalized in ink. Here's something historians still debate. Could China have avoided this outcome? If Lin Zexu had been less aggressive, if the emperor had negotiated earlier, if China had adopted Western military technology sooner, would it have made a difference? Some scholars say yes, that different choices at crucial moments might have led to better terms. Others argue that the power imbalance was so extreme that the result was inevitable. Britain had the industrial capacity and military technology to impose its will regardless of Chinese diplomacy. The treaty doesn't even mention opium directly. That's almost darkly funny. The war was fought over opium, but the treaty just establishes trade rights and extraterritoriality. The opium trade isn't legalized, but it isn't stopped either. In fact, it accelerates. You drift to Shanghai, one of the newly opened treaty ports. Before the treaty, Shanghai was a mid-sized port city, important but not exceptional. Now it's transforming. Foreign merchants are arriving, building warehouses and offices along the waterfront. The British establish a settlement area. Other foreign powers, Americans, French, create their own zones. These foreign settlements operate under their own laws. Chinese police have no authority there. Chinese courts have no jurisdiction. It's bizarre when you think about it. Sections of Chinese cities where China has no sovereignty. The opium trade finds new routes through these treaty ports. Shanghai, in particular, becomes a major distribution point. Ships arrive from India, and the opium flows inland along the Yangtze River and its tributaries, reaching deeper into China than ever before. And now, with the treaty ports open, Chinese merchants start thinking, why should foreigners monopolize opium profits? If the trade is happening anyway, why not grow opium domestically? So they do. You watch as Chinese farmers in Sichuan, Yunnan, and other provinces begin converting land to poppy cultivation. The soil is right. The climate works. And the profits are extraordinary compared to growing rice or wheat. By the late 1840s, domestic opium production is rising sharply. This creates an ironic situation. The British fought a war to force China to accept opium imports, but increasingly, China is supplying its own market. The silver drain slows, but the addiction crisis accelerates. Here's a detail that reveals the scope. By the 1850s, some estimates suggest that 10 to 15% of the adult male population in some regions are regular opium users. Not all of them are addicts in the severe sense, but enough are that it's affecting every level of society. Scholars, officials, soldiers, merchants, laborers. The addiction doesn't discriminate. You stand in an opium den in Shanghai, much larger now than the simple establishments from earlier decades. This one has multiple rooms, different grades of opium for different budgets, attendants who cater to regular customers. Some men come here every day after work. It's routine, ordinary, normalized. A man lies on a wooden bench, pipe in hand. He's maybe 30 years old, thin, his skin has that grayish tone that chronic opium use produces. He works as a clerk somewhere, probably. He still functions, still goes to work, but more and more of his income goes to this. Eventually, he'll stop functioning. Eventually, he'll lose his job. Eventually, he'll end up on the street, one of the hollow-eyed figures you see begging in the foreign settlements. But not yet. For now, he's just drifting. Back in Beijing, the imperial court is trying to process what's happened. The Daowang emperor is aging, troubled. The war revealed weaknesses in the empire that can't be ignored. Some officials are arguing for reform, for learning from the West, for building modern arsenals, and training new armies. Others argue that the problem isn't military technology, but moral decay. That if China returns to proper Confucian values and disciplines itself, strength will follow. It's a debate that will continue for decades. Meanwhile, other foreign powers are watching. If Britain can force China to sign unequal treaties, why can't they? France, the United States, and other nations begin demanding similar concessions. More treaty ports, more extraterritoriality, more loss of sovereignty. China signs treaty after treaty, each one chipping away at imperial authority. You watch from the walls of the Forbidden City. The city itself hasn't changed much. Same courtyards, same ceremonies, same rituals that have continued for centuries. But the world around it is transforming in ways the rituals can't accommodate. There's a memorial written during this period by a provincial official. He describes visiting a village where half the men are opium addicts. Tax collection has collapsed because people spend all their money on opium. Fields are going unplanted because laborers are too weak or unmotivated to work. Local order is breaking down because even the police are addicted. He ends with a question. How can the empire survive if this continues? It's a good question. The Treaty of Nanjing was supposed to settle things, to establish a new framework for China's relations with the West. Instead, it just established the pattern. Force, defeat, concession, humiliation. And the pattern would repeat. The thing about defeat is that it rarely comes just once. You're drifting through the 1850s now, and China is unraveling in slow motion. The First Opium War was supposed to settle things. The Treaty of Nanjing was supposed to create a stable framework for foreign relations. Instead, it created a template for further humiliation. The treaty ports are thriving, if you're foreign. Shanghai, in particular, is booming. Western merchants are making fortunes. The city's foreign settlements have gas lights, paved roads, modern buildings. Just outside these zones, Chinese Shanghai operates by candlelight and ancient customs. It's two cities occupying the same space, and the tensions are constant. Here's what happens. Chinese authorities still try to enforce Chinese law, but only on Chinese people. Foreign nationals live under their own consular jurisdiction. This creates predictable problems. Chinese officials can't arrest foreign criminals. Foreign merchants can operate outside Chinese regulations. Disputes fester because there's no shared legal framework. Both sides feel aggrieved. The British want more access, more ports, more rights. They want the right to trade anywhere in China, not just designated ports. They want diplomatic representation in Beijing, which the Qing court still refuses. They want the opium trade explicitly legalized so they don't have to pretend it's not happening. The Qing government wants foreigners to stop pushing, to accept the current arrangements, to show proper respect to Chinese sovereignty. Neither side is going to get what it wants peacefully. You're watching a minor incident in Canton in 1856. A Chinese-owned ship called the Arrow is boarded by Chinese police. They arrest some crew members suspected of piracy. The ship is flying a British flag, technically expired, but the British consul doesn't care about technicalities. He demands the crew be released. He claims British subjects were arrested by Chinese authorities, which violates extraterritoriality. The Chinese governor refuses. It's a small thing, really. A misunderstanding that could be resolved through negotiation. But neither side is interested in negotiating. Both sides are looking for leverage, for excuses to push their positions further. The British use the Arrow incident as justification for military action. Here's where it gets complicated. The British aren't acting alone this time. France joins them. The French have their own grievances. A French missionary was executed in inland China for illegally proselytizing. France demands that China allow Christian missionaries to operate freely throughout the empire. So now it's two European powers against China. The Second Opium War, though it's sometimes called the Arrow War, begins in late 1856. British and French forces attack Canton. The city falls relatively quickly. The pattern from the First War repeats. Modern weapons against obsolete defenses, industrial military power against traditional forces. But this time, the foreigners push deeper. You watch as Allied forces move north, threatening Beijing itself. The emperor and court flee the capital, an unprecedented humiliation. The emperor abandons the Forbidden City, running to a summer palace in Chengde, leaving his brother Prince Gong to negotiate. And then something happens that will echo through Chinese memory for generations. The British and French forces reach the old summer palace, the Yuanmingyuan, just outside Beijing. It's one of the most extraordinary places in China. Imagine a vast estate of gardens, lakes, palaces, libraries, and temples spread across 860 acres. Centuries of accumulated art and treasures. Porcelain, jade, gold, paintings, ancient manuscripts, astronomical instruments. It's the crystallization of Qing Dynasty culture and wealth. The Allied troops loot it. For days, soldiers carry out treasures. They take what they can carry and destroy what they can't. Porcelain gets smashed. Silk gets torn. Buildings are ransacked. And then the British commander, Lord Elgin, ironically the son of the man who took marbles from the Parthenon, orders the entire complex burned. You watch the flames consume pavilion after pavilion. The destruction takes 3 days. Smoke rises over Beijing, visible for miles. It's not military necessity. The palace has no strategic value. It's pure punishment, a demonstration of power, a message written in ashes. Here's what historians debate. Was the burning of the Summer Palace a war crime? By modern standards, absolutely. It's deliberate destruction of cultural heritage during armed conflict. But in 1860, there were no Geneva Conventions, no international laws of war that anyone followed. The British justified it as retaliation for the torture and execution of British envoys who'd been captured earlier. Still, it was unnecessary, it was cruel, and it worked. Prince Gong signs the Convention of Beijing in October 1860. The terms are even harsher than the Treaty of Nanjing. China must open more ports, 11 additional ones. Foreign diplomats can now reside in Beijing. Christian missionaries can operate anywhere in China and own property. And, crucially, the opium trade is legalized. No more pretending. It's official commerce now. Oh, and China has to pay more reparations. 8 million taels of silver to Britain and France combined. You stand in the ruins of the Summer Palace after the foreigners withdraw. The buildings are gone, just charred foundations and scattered debris. Some treasures survived in the rubble. Locals sneak in to scavenge. Over the following decades, more will be stolen, sold, scattered to museums and private collections around the world. The palace will never be fully rebuilt. The Qing Dynasty keeps it as ruins, a reminder of what happened. Later Chinese governments will do the same. Even today, you can visit the ruins, a memorial to this moment when foreign powers demonstrated they could destroy Chinese civilization's greatest achievements with impunity. The psychological impact is immense. For centuries, China saw itself as the center of civilization. Foreigners were barbarians who came to pay tribute and learn Chinese culture. That worldview is now impossible to maintain. The barbarians defeated China militarily twice. They dictated terms. They burned the emperor's palace. What does that mean for Chinese identity? For the mandate of heaven? For the whole Confucian order that justified imperial rule? You drift through Beijing in the aftermath. The emperor returns from exile. Court life resumes. Ceremonies continue. But everyone knows something has broken that can't be fixed with ritual. Some officials start advocating more forcefully for reform. Learn from the West. Build modern arsenals. Train new armies. Send students abroad. Adopt Western science and technology while preserving Chinese values. It's called self-strengthening, and it becomes official policy. But it's too late, too tentative, too compromised by officials who benefit from the status quo. The opium trade, now legal, reaches its peak in the 1870s and 1880s. Combined imports and domestic production mean opium is everywhere. The addiction crisis affects every level of society. Government revenue suffers because people spend money on opium instead of productive goods. Labor productivity declines. Military readiness weakens. And the empire keeps weakening. The pattern was clear now: force, concession, deeper dependency. By the 1870s, China is caught in a trap of its own making. Well, not entirely its own making. But the domestic opium production that seemed like a solution to the silver drain has become another crisis layered on top of the original one. You're drifting through Yunnan province now, in China's southwest. The landscape is beautiful. Mountains terraced with crops, valleys crossed by rivers, villages clinging to hillsides. And everywhere, poppies. Chinese farmers discovered what Indian farmers already knew. Opium pays better than almost anything else you can grow. A field of rice might feed your family. A field of poppies might make you prosperous. The choice, for many, isn't difficult. By the 1880s, domestic Chinese opium production has actually surpassed imports. The British and other foreign merchants still bring opium in. It's legal now. Remember, sanctioned by treaty. But Chinese-grown opium dominates the market. Here's the ironic result. The silver isn't flowing out anymore, at least not for opium purchases. That particular crisis has stabilized. But the addiction crisis has exploded. Estimates vary wildly, but some scholars suggest that by the late 1800s, somewhere between 10 and 40 million Chinese people are regular opium users. The range itself tells you something. Nobody really knows. It's too widespread to count. You step into an opium den in Chengdu. It's midday. The place is full. Men from different social classes lie on the platforms. You can tell by their clothing or what's left of it. A merchant in silk robes that have seen better days. Laborers in rough cotton. A former soldier, maybe. A scholar whose career probably ended years ago. They're not talking. Opium smokers don't socialize much. They drift into their own worlds, private and interior. The proprietor moves between them, heating opium over a lamp, charging by the pipe. It's a business mundane and ordinary, like running a tea house, except the product destroys people. Some of these men will leave in a few hours, return to jobs or families, function relatively normally. Others live here, essentially. They've lost everything else: money, family, social position. The opium den is the only place they belong now. Here's a detail that reveals how normalized addiction has become. There are special opium shops for women. Respectable women, even. They don't go to the public dens, but they smoke at home or in private establishments. Opium crosses class and gender boundaries completely. The Qing government tries, periodically, to crack down. They issue edicts against opium cultivation. They threaten punishments for dealers and users. But enforcement is inconsistent, often corrupt, and ultimately futile. Why? Because too many people benefit from the trade. Farmers growing poppies, merchants distributing opium, officials taking bribes to ignore it, local governments collecting taxes on opium sales. Even the imperial treasury, in some provinces, depends on opium revenue. You can't ban something that's woven into your economy. Meanwhile, other problems are compounding. China's population has been growing steadily, from maybe 150 million in 1700 to over 400 million by the late 1800s. That's enormous population pressure on agricultural land. More mouths to feed, more competition for resources, and opium is making it worse. Land that could grow food grows poppies instead. Labor that could build infrastructure or manufacture goods is sedated and unproductive. The empire is weakening from within. You drift north to the coast where Japan is watching. Japan went through its own forced opening by Western powers. American warships in 1853, treaties imposed, similar humiliations. But Japan responded differently. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 launched aggressive modernization. Japan is building factories, railroads, a modern navy, a conscript army. They're learning from the West faster and more completely than China. And they're looking at Korea, Taiwan, and other territories in China's traditional sphere of influence with new ambitions. In 1894, Japan and China go to war over Korea. It's not about opium. That crisis is long past. But the war reveals how much the opium era weakened China. The Qing military, despite decades of self-strengthening efforts, is still fundamentally obsolete. Japan wins, decisively and humiliatingly. The Treaty of Shimonoseki, signed in 1895, forces China to recognize Korean independence, which Japan then dominates, cede Taiwan and other territories to Japan, pay massive reparations, and open more ports. It's the unequal treaty pattern again, but this time imposed by an Asian neighbor, China, traditionally considered inferior. The psychological blow is devastating. You stand in Beijing as news of the treaty spreads. Scholars and officials are gathering, writing protests, demanding that the government reject the terms. But there's no choice. China lost. The terms are non-negotiable. Some intellectuals start asking fundamental questions. Why is China so weak? How did this happen? What needs to change? The answers they arrive at are radical. China needs complete transformation: political, social, educational, economic. The imperial system itself might be the problem. Confucian traditions might be holding China back. These ideas are dangerous to speak aloud. The Qing Dynasty still rules. But the ideas spread anyway, in private conversations, in reform societies, in writings that circulate despite censorship. Here's something historians still debate. How much did the opium crisis contribute to the Qing Dynasty's eventual collapse? Some scholars argue it was central. The financial drain, the social decay, the military weakness all stem partly from opium. Others say China faced many challenges, and opium was just one factor among many. Both are probably right. You drift through a village in Guangdong in the 1890s. The local school has closed. No money for a teacher. The irrigation system needs repair, but there's no labor to fix it. The tax collector comes through, but collections are poor. Too many men are addicted. Too little productive activity. This is happening in villages across southern China. The central government is weak. Local order is fraying. Bandits operate with impunity in some regions. Secret societies grow stronger. In 1898, a young emperor tries to implement radical reforms, modernize the government, build railways, reform education, create a constitutional monarchy. The 100 Days Reform, it's called. The conservative court, led by the Empress Dowager Cixi, crushes it. The reformers are executed or exiled. The emperor is placed under house arrest. The dynasty chooses preservation over adaptation. It's the wrong choice, but they don't know that yet. You stand outside the Forbidden City again. Inside, the ceremonies continue. The emperor performs the rituals. Officials prostrate themselves. Everything looks the same as it did 100 years ago. But outside the palace walls, China is transforming in ways the rituals can't control or comprehend. The opium that flowed into China beginning in the early 1800s didn't just create addicts. It created a century of weakness, crisis, and humiliation that fundamentally reshaped Chinese civilization. The empire that believed itself eternal was entering its final decades. The Qing Dynasty falls in 1912. You're watching as the last emperor, a child named Puyi, only 6 years old, abdicates the throne. The ceremony is formal, dignified, almost peaceful. No violence, no execution, just an ending. 2,000 years of imperial rule in China, finished. The revolutionaries who overthrow the dynasty have many grievances, many reasons. Corruption, military weakness, foreign domination, failed reforms. But thread through all of it, visible if you look carefully, is the legacy of opium. The financial crisis that started with the silver drain. The social decay that spread with addiction. The military weakness revealed in the Opium Wars. The unequal treaties that followed. The loss of sovereignty. The psychology of humiliation. All of it traces back, at least partially, to those poppy fields in Bengal. Here's what's remarkable. The opium problem doesn't end with the dynasty. The new Republic of China inherits the crisis. Millions of addicts. Domestic poppy cultivation across multiple provinces. An economy partially dependent on opium revenue. The new government tries to ban it. They issue proclamations. They launch campaigns. They destroy opium stocks in public ceremonies, echoing Lin Zexu, ironically. But they can't stop it either. Warlords in various regions use opium profits to fund their armies. Japanese occupiers, later, will encourage opium production in territories they control, deliberately, as a way to pacify and weaken the population. The cycle continues. It's not until the communist victory in 1949 that opium addiction in China is finally brutally suppressed. The communist government uses methods the Qing Dynasty never could. Complete social control, mass mobilization campaigns, harsh punishments for users and dealers, forced rehabilitation. By the 1950s, the opium crisis that began in the early 1800s is finally over. 150 years. 5 or 6 generations. countless lives destroyed. You drift back to that Canton marketplace from the beginning, imagining it in 1900, in 1920, in 1940. The foreign ships are still there. The treaty ports are still operating under extraterritorial rules. Chinese sovereignty is still compromised. The opium might have started as a trade issue, a way for Britain to balance its accounts, but became something much larger, a catalyst for China's century of humiliation. The period from roughly 1839 to 1949, when foreign powers dominated China and the empire collapsed. Historians still argue about counterfactuals. What if Lin Zexu had negotiated instead of destroying the opium? What if the Qing had modernized faster? What if they'd won the Opium Wars? But these questions miss something important. The opium trade was never just about opium. It was about industrial powers using their technological and military advantages to force open markets and impose their will on societies that couldn't resist. The opium was just the tool. You stand in modern Shanghai now, in the 21st century. The city is unrecognizable from its 19th century self. Skyscrapers, maglev trains, digital screens everywhere. China is a superpower again, economically and increasingly militarily. But the memory of the opium era persists. The ruins of the old summer palace are preserved as a patriotic education base, a place where Chinese students are taken to remember what foreign imperialism did. The Opium Wars are taught in schools as foundational events in modern Chinese history. The phrase "century of humiliation" is official terminology. It shapes how China sees itself and the world. When the Chinese government takes a hard line on sovereignty issues, over Hong Kong, Taiwan, the South China Sea, part of that comes from opium-era memory. We won't be dominated again. We won't sign unequal treaties. We won't let foreigners dictate terms. The trauma is historical, but it's also present. Here's a small detail. In 1997, when Britain returned Hong Kong to China, the handover ceremony happened on July 1st. The date was chosen carefully. It marked exactly 156 years since the Treaty of Nanjing was signed, the treaty that ceded Hong Kong to Britain in perpetuity. Perpetuity turned out to be 156 years. The Chinese government made sure everyone understood the symbolism. This wasn't just a legal transfer. It was the closing of a historical wound, the reversal of an injustice that began with the opium trade. You drift through a museum in Beijing dedicated to the Opium Wars. The exhibits are detailed, educational, and profoundly political. They show the technological gap between Qing and British forces. They display treaties with their humiliating terms. They quote Lin Zexu's letters about defending Chinese civilization. And they frame it all as a story of victimization by foreign imperialism, followed by eventual national revival. It's not wrong exactly, but it's not complete either. The full story includes Chinese choices, the decision to ban opium rather than regulate it, the failure to modernize earlier, the corruption that allowed smuggling networks to thrive. It includes the complexity of addiction, economics, and social change. But museums aren't built for complexity. They're built for memory, and memory is always selective. So what destroyed the Qing dynasty? What ended China's greatest empire? The simple answer: opium trade, foreign imperialism, military defeat. The complex answer: a collision between traditional Chinese civilization and industrial modernity, played out through trade policy, addiction, warfare, and humiliation. A crisis that began with tea and silver, escalated through poppies and gunboats, and ended with revolution and transformation. The opium was the catalyst, not the cause. But catalysts matter. They accelerate reactions that might have taken different forms at different speeds. And this reaction, the one that started when British merchants decided to solve their trade imbalance problem with Indian opium, changed China forever. It changed how China sees itself, how it interacts with the world, how it understands power, sovereignty, and dignity. You're drifting now through quiet darkness, through the space between history and sleep. The empire is gone. The treaties are void. The opium dens are closed. The last emperor died in 1967, working as a gardener in Beijing, a private citizen in the communist state built on the ruins of his dynasty. but the memory remains. In museum displays, in textbooks, in political speeches, in the collective consciousness of a civilization that was forced, painfully, to transform itself. The story of how trade destroyed an empire is also the story of how that destruction created modern China. And now, in the gentle dark, with history settling like dust, you can rest. The emperors are sleeping. The merchants are sleeping. The ships that carried tea and opium are rotting in the depths of the sea. Everything that seemed permanent has passed. Everything that seemed impossible has come to be. That's what history teaches if you let it. That empires rise and fall. That nothing is eternal. That even the greatest civilizations face their reckonings. But also this, that people endure. That societies adapt. That from catastrophe comes transformation. China fell, and China rose again. The dynasty ended, and something new began. The cycle continues, as it always has. As it always will. Sweet dreams.